And welcome. We are going to be looking at how the Electoral College system works in this screencast today. And I always like to start out with some type of graphic, but this is a pretty cool cartoon by cartoonist Dave Granlund. And what he's doing here, as you can see, is he's mentioning the Electoral College. He's using some really cool imagery to show how, as you can tell, it is very hard, very complicated, almost like a maze to become the president, because the Electoral College is very confusing. There's a lot of rules, and most Americans really have no idea how it works. So that's what we're going to look at today. In this slide right here, as you can see, I've shown this to my students a few times, but this is a really cool graphic portrayal of how you become the president, starting with the constitutional requirements through the primaries and caucuses, which are happening as we speak. Then we have the national conventions in the summer where everything's formalized. It's kind of like one big pep rally for the parties to get ready for the main event, the campaigning for the general election. And then at the end, you have the Electoral College, where each of the state's electors vote, and their votes are counted. And finally, the following year, we have our inauguration for the new president. And so that's what we're going to be looking at in the next few slides. This is a pretty cool timeline. I stole, borrowed from a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and what she did was she broke down just a very basic, simple timeline of how everything works. You have the early primaries in January, then you have Super Tuesday in February, and then all throughout these months here you have all the states participating in their primaries and caucuses. The Republicans and Democrats will have their convention in the late summer, early fall, and then once again you have this campaign for the general election in the fall. The election is in November of 2012, and then inauguration will take place January of 2013. This is a pretty cool cartoon. This is an older cartoon. And in this cartoon, I think I had a little technical difficulty there, but this is a pretty cool cartoon showing how third-party candidates can have an impact on the election. And I think we've seen this before in class, but this does a really good job of showing how someone like a Ralph Nader, who ran in the third party in 2000, was able to kind of take away votes from Al Gore, a Democrat, in 2000, allowing George Bush to win in 2000. If you're a follower of a third party, you might not like being called a spoiler, but that is one of the effects when you have a popular third party. They often hurt or take votes away from their closest party in terms of ideology. We'll talk more about this cartoon in class. How do you become the president? Obviously, the easiest way to become president is through elections. Maybe not the easiest, but the way we think about it the most. Most presidents that have ever become presidents were elected using the Electoral College. We have a 4-year term. You know that the 22nd Amendment created the term limits to limit presidents to 2 terms or up to 10 years, depending upon if they took over for a president who was disabled or was assassinated or died. There are other ways to become president as well. The 25th Amendment, passed in the 20th century, emphasized and clarified how you become president if someone died, if they resigned, or if any type of removal happened. The only president that has ever officially resigned from office, Richard Nixon, we talked about with the Watergate affair of the 70s. 2 presidents have been impeached. We'll talk more about that in class, Andrew Johnson and William Jefferson Clinton. It's important to know neither was convicted. The Senate did not have a 2/3 approval to convict them in either one. Andrew Johnson was very close. He was almost convicted, 1 vote away from being removed from office. And just to remind you all, in order to be impeached, you need a majority vote in the House and then the Senate conducts the trial. You need 2/3 of the Senate to vote to convict and remove someone from office. If the president is impeached, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over the Senate trial. If you have the ability to, there's some really interesting videos. Most of them are on my website where they do a really good job explaining the Electoral College. Some a little bit more simply, some go into a little bit more depth. But just, very basic information right here. You got the Electoral College, quite simply, is the group of people that officially elect the president. Each state chooses its electors. Some states give the parties the ability to have more influence in this. And as you probably know by now, the electors each state has is determined by the number of members in the House population, plus the 2 senators every state receives. In the great state of Maryland, where we live, you have the eight districts, 8 House members. We get our 2 senators, so we have 10 electoral votes in Maryland. This is a pretty cool map showing how the Electoral College is broken down proportionately, and a couple things are going on here. You notice how some states are really big, some states are really small. This isn't your standard map. Obviously, you're probably figured this out by now, but the states that are really big, California, Pennsylvania, New York, Florida, these are states that have lots of people, lots of electoral votes. You also might know that some states are blue or purplish or light or red or light red. The more blue, the more likely they vote Democratic. The more red, the more likely they vote Republican. And those states that are kind of in the middle, maybe, one of those swing states. This is just a little bit of a historical background of what's going on with the Electoral College. Why do we call it the Electoral College? Well, electors are people who pledge to vote for a candidate in the Electoral College. And the word electors comes from the Holy Roman Empire, where you had these very elite German princes who were entitled at one point to elect the new emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. We go from the Holy Roman Empire to American Idol, and it gets a little bit cut off at the bottom here, but a really simple way, if you get confused about the Electoral College, is to think about how the American Idol is similar. When you're voting for the president, you're not necessarily voting directly for Barack Obama or the Republican candidate, which we're still waiting on. You are actually voting for someone else, an elector who pledges to cast his or her vote for Obama or the Republican. So here comes the analogy. It's kind of like when you're voting for Jennifer Lopez, Randy, or Steven Tyler to then determine who they think should be the next American Idol, instead of texting, directly voting. So here we have another way that the founders tried to take away total direct democracy at the national level. They wanted to make sure that we did not have mob rule. I'm not going to read this to you, but this is an interesting insight to what Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers, thought about the Electoral College. This comes from Federalist 68, and what you want to emphasize is that the Electoral College were supposed to be fellow citizens. They were most likely to possess information, the education to make such a complicated investigation. And you can kind of, think about this a little bit, and man, I mean, these people really did not have faith that the American people were bright, knowledgeable about what was going on back then. Have things changed? I think so, but that's for you to decide. Another Electoral College analogy, I found this from another teacher years ago, but during the 6 games of the '96 World Series, we're talking baseball here, and I actually remember this, the Atlanta Braves scored a total of 26 runs. The New York Yankees scored only 18 runs, but the New York Yankees still won the World Series. Now you might be thinking, well, the Braves had more runs. Shouldn't they have won? No. The Yankees won 4 games and the Braves won only 2 games. And so the Braves could argue that this outcome was unfair. But the rules say that the championship goes to the team that wins 4 of the 7 games, the majority of the games, not the team that scores the most runs. The Electoral College. Well, the Electoral College is the person who receives the most electoral votes, who wins the majority of the games. There you go, there's your connection. Not the person who wins the most popular votes or scores the most runs. So the electoral vote is more important than popular vote. Let's go through the steps of the Electoral College pretty quickly. Obviously, you know, in step 1, you have eligible voters. They can choose to vote or not vote. In the United States, we don't have mandatory voting. In some states, we do have early voting. Maryland just recently passed a law allowing people to vote early in certain precincts for voting. Step 2, the candidate who gets a plurality of a state's popular vote receives all of that state's electoral votes. So in a sense, your vote does count. However, not every state uses this method. Maine and Nebraska are 2 states that do not use this method, and we'll talk about them in just a minute. Here you have a map showing how certain states gained and lost seats in the House, as well as gained or lost electoral college votes based upon reapportionment data from the 2010 census. And you can see Texas, Florida gained a lot of electoral votes, 2 here. Texas gained 4, while in the Northeast, Midwest, you've seen states that have lost electoral college votes. We'll talk more about that in class. The candidate that wins a majority of the electoral votes, they become the president. And the magic number, as we'll see over and over again over the next year, is 270. If you get 270 electoral votes, boom, you're president. If you divide 270 over 538, you get a very, very small majority. Nevertheless, it is a majority. However, you can win the popular vote at the national level, but you can also lose the national electoral vote. And so if you lose the national electoral vote, even if you had the most popular votes, I'm sorry, you don't become president. This is a picture of Al Gore, and I love this picture. It's totally out of context, but you can see how frustrated he might have been that he had many, many more votes than George Bush if you add all of the people's votes up from all the 50 states together. But George Bush had more electoral votes, and in the Constitution, the electoral votes are what count. Step 5, you know, if you get the electoral count, if you get your 270 electoral votes, you become president. The inauguration takes place January 20th following the election, as stated in the Constitution. And this can happen, doesn't happen very often, but if a candidate does not win a majority of electoral votes, then it comes down to the U.S. House of Representatives, and they decide the presidential election. This is a very powerful power given to them in the Constitution. It's only happened a few times. It happened in 1800 and 1824. Hasn't happened in a while. You never know. It could happen again. This is just a map showing 2008 all the different possibilities of how John McCain and Barack Obama could have reached in a tie. And if they did reach in a tie, man, the House would have picked the president. And you know that the American people would not have been happy with the House picking the president. In these next couple maps, you're just seeing how the Electoral College map has changed in terms of total electoral votes. And in this map, you see how the Obama, all the states he won in blue, the ones in red, those are ones McCain won. We're going to be looking at this data more in class. This is the 2004 Electoral College map, and you can see that John Kerry did not win as many states as George Bush, thus George Bush became president because he won more electoral votes. This is a really cool resource. This comes from Charlie Cook, who is a big prognosticator when it comes to politics. We'll talk more about this in class, but these states right up here, these are what he's calling the swing states, where the electoral vote is, we don't know who they're going to go for, you better believe that the candidate